On today's show, I'm going to be talking with Jeff Lieberman, and he's got a new book out that covers his career. We're going to be talking about that and all the movies that led up to it, some cult classics, including Squirm, Blue Sunshine, Just Before Dawn, Satan's Little Helper, and more. So welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know, I read your book, and I really liked it.
Well, that would be weird if you said I read your book and it sucked. But I'm going to interview you anyway.
Well, what I like about it, first of all, I love reading books about filmmakers, and get their first-hand point of view. But you write about a lot of things other than your films, too, what was going on in your life during those times. And I'm really curious just what motivated you to write the book right now.
Well, I didn't have a motivation to write a book per se. I over the years, and when something unusual happened or entertaining, and I would recount it at parties or with my wife or just family, and they would seem to, laugh and enjoy it. And then somewhere along the line, the suggestion was you should write these things down, and so you don't forget it. And I said, yeah, that's true. And I started writing them down over the years. And then when I was doing these film festivals and recounting stories during the Q&A sessions, I realized that there really is a much broader audience for this stuff that are interested. And it's certainly not just genre horror fans. Mm-hmm. So I took all the stories that I had, wrote up ones that I didn't have written up, and then the real trick was to put it in chronological order to give it a narrative. That's what really took the work. And then I had a book, and I said, okay.
Now, the book is called Day of the Living Me, Adventures of a Subversive Cult Filmmaker from the Golden Age. Do you think you were making films during a golden age? Was there something special, especially back in the 70s?
No, not at all. Everything in retrospect, all these labels came later. There was nothing golden about, making those movies at the time. In fact, the term independent didn't exist yet. They say John Cassavetes was the king of independent movies. Well, he didn't know that. You made a movie, and the only thing you had in mind is to get that movie into theaters. And the only way you could do that is with a distributor, and everybody was shooting for a major to pick up the movies. It was very common that you would finance a movie and then a big studio would take it for the world. So that was the goal. But it just turned out that we didn't have anything to do homages to or copy or whatever words they use. Homage I hear a lot, but the genre that people describe as the genre that everybody is using as a basis for the stuff they do today is, by and large, the early 70s into the 80s. Certainly Halloween, and well, I guess you can go back to the Birds, Hitchcock and Psycho, but so now in retrospect, it's looked at as a golden age, but not then.
What I like about the book is, first of all, you're a New York filmmaker, and you paint such a vivid picture of New York in the late 60s and early 70s. And it seems like there was something brewing with independent film. You were working for Canon when they were putting together Joe. And even though you didn't necessarily meet everyone, there was just something about Scorsese in the air and, Brian De Palma. So I'm just wondering, what was it like to revisit those times? And, are those sentimental times for you?
I think they're sentimental to the sense that when you get to my age, everything is sentimental. You tend to remember. I remember the fuck ups. I don't know if that's common, but and it comes through in the book. But when I screw up, it makes a much more of an impression on me than when I do something that everybody pats me on the back.
And you have a good memory because there's a lot of detail,
Yeah.
and you kept a journal. So is the journal the basis for most of this book?
Yeah, well, it wasn't really a journal. I didn't keep a journal. I just jotted down these stories because sometimes there'd be a story that I'd think that could be either fictionalized and turn into a movie in itself, you know? And it didn't really have any form to it. I had to go through my hard drive and see the different stories and then put a label on them. And that's how the whole thing came together. It was a long period of time that
Hmm.
this stuff to do, but I wasn't it wasn't a full-time or even part-time. I'd go months without even touching it.
Because I think for a lot
Well,
of people, sure, if they look at your filmography, they think, oh, everything started with Squirm in 1976. I like that it showed no, like most filmmakers, either went to school, you had other jobs, other experiences. And I just love that picture you painted of being out of school, working for a company, doing TV commercials, going with your girlfriend at the time to Woodstock, and just, it really set that place and time. But I think my absolute favorite, and that's what really got me hooked into your story, is when you talked about, this was before you made Squirm, but you were scouting locations for a movie where they wanted to film in Little Italy, except at the time, The Godfather was about to shoot, and there was all this resistance, and you somehow got in the back door and charmed the people at Larry's bar, and that was this whole adventure of how these people who were probably in organized crime gave you all your locations in the neighborhood.
yeah, you know, it's funny that it occurred to me that of all the stuff that's been written about The Godfather, and I think that I think that somebody's doing an actual movie of the making, not a fiction, a dramatic movie of the making of The Godfather, like right now for Netflix or something. But there's certainly been documentaries and a million articles, and nobody ever mentioned or even knew that a movie starring Red Buttons, a real movie, was being shot at the same time just blocks away. And, you know, looking back, I thought, wow, this is something that somebody like Scorsese would dig because he lived in that neighborhood. But yeah, I mean, it was pretty amazing. In fact, that's when I got mooned by Marlon Brando.
I remember that. Because at that time, it sounds like your production started filming first, and then they started, and you guys overlapped.
Right, that's
Well,
right.
the movie was called Who Killed Mary What's Her Name? And you actually did a lot of rewrites, but you didn't get that credit, but then they gave you an associate producer credit for that.
Right, that's right. That was my first actual thing. It was my first credit for anything. Yeah,
Well, what I liked about that story is, a lot of people who want to make films don't realize how you have to really problem solve, and you have to be very spontaneous. And you were, rejected by everyone, saying, oh, you can't use our restaurant or bar to film in, And then you kind of figured, oh, word was out that these people did not want, or like how The Godfather was going to portray them. And it really talks about how you went out there, face to face with people into this kind of unknown territory and kind of learned as you went.
yeah. People that have read the book, um, some of them not really friends, they're fans, and other people that are close friends, like Richard Crystal, Billy Crystal's brother. And Richard wrote to me recently as we finished the book. He said, I forgot what giant balls you had. And, uh, I don't try to, I'm me, but it does really, when I look back and I say, holy, I was 21 and what did I do? It's hard to believe that I even, even directing Rod Serling at 22, what was I thinking?
Well, to sum of your career for people, who just know your, obvious titles like Squirm, Blue Sunshine. You've also done documentary work, throughout all that too.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about my career. Like, if somebody writes my name in short, it would say Jeff Squirm Lieberman. Like, I was 25, I made this worm movie, and then I croaked, and that's the way it works. I mean, I look at it this way: it's that it's better to be known for something than nothing. But I mean, the Sonny Liston thing won an Emmy Award. Nobody cares. But seriously, different serious documentaries I did. But I'm not. You have to be Ken Burns to be known for documentaries, And so if somebody could see. In fact, I've had this happen where people have told me about a documentary they loved, and they had no idea that I made it. And I
Mhm.
don't blame them. Like, the average person doesn't look. They don't even look at the director of feature movies, but they certainly don't look at who directed and produced the documentary.
Well, here's the question I have about your career. Because you've had the freedom to do projects that you seem to really enjoy, that you wrote and directed. You take your time in between projects, so it sounds like you're not rushed. You don't feel forced just to churn something out. It sounds like when you do a project, you really want to do it. But what I'm curious is all those other contemporaries of the 70s, the Spielbergs, the Scorseses, the um, De Palmas. At a certain point, Hollywood was gobbling up all these indie filmmakers, especially the New York ones, and then putting them into the studio system and, probably dictating what they did more, maybe, giving them bigger budgets to work with. I mean, was that a temptation of yours at the time?
Well, it wasn't that simple because, like, take a guy like John Carpenter. He was, you know, Brian De Palma was before me a little bit, 4 or 5 years older. And actually, he was kind of a role model for me because he was New York. I was using the same people, in the filmmaking in New York City. You can use the same camera equipment places. You can use the same mixing studio and editing facilities. And but a guy like, say, John Carpenter or Toby Hooper, they made these incredible, great horror movies, groundbreaking. Like I said before, the reason it's um, the golden age is because Chainsaw wasn't derivative of anything, and neither was Halloween. They were templates for a new thing. They were great, and but they stuck to. That's what John Carpenter wanted to do, and that's what Toby wanted to do. And it's not what I wanted to do. It's like I did Squirm, and that's like, okay, I finished it. That doesn't mean I want to make another horror movie. Well, to them, they're different people, and that's what they want to do. And that's more appealing to Hollywood when it became in vogue to make bigger budget horror genre movies. Those guys, they were branded to do that, and I wasn't. And I'm not sorry that it wasn't because it's not me. I'm very eclectic. It's not a it's not a good word to apply if you want to make a lot of money, but that's who I am.
Hmm. Another thing I liked in the book is when you went to film school, you said that that department was fairly new at that school, and they were basically making up that department as you were taking those classes. It sounds like it was kind of unformed, and film schools really weren't what they are now back then.
Oh, that's an understatement. I mean, we had so-called professors who didn't. You ever hear the expression "those who know do and those who don't teach"? Well, I think they came up with. If you looked it up in a dictionary, it was the School of Visual Arts in 1966, 67. As far as in film school, I mean, there were just very few that even worked in the industry. They were professional teachers, and I had one. I had Andrew Saris as a. I don't know if you're familiar who Andrew Saris was, but he was a big New York Village Voice, really top tier film critic. But that doesn't mean he should be teaching screenwriting. What does he know about writing a script? He never wrote one in his life. And people like that. So I didn't really get anything out of film school except for getting out of the war in Vietnam, which was the reason why half the people who went to college back then was doing it for that reason. You got to deferment, you know. It was only when I got out that I started to learn. Earn while you learn.
Earn while you learn. Well, you got a job after school for Canon Films, which back then, before they became sort of the big action studio of the 80s, they were doing more like erotica, weren't they?
Right. They were actually not even shooting those movies. They were importing them from Sweden, places like that, and then they would dub them and recut them for, you know, what they could and couldn't get away with showing on, you know, 42nd Street and theaters like that. So it
Well,
was only when they tripped on stepping up a little bit, making their own movie and making what became Joe, which I go into in the book, that they put themselves on the map, so to speak. They were able to go public. But when you know, and what most people know about Canon Films and all those action movies, was Menachem Golan, Golan Globus, two guys. They bought a nearly bankrupt public company, Canon. When Canon was almost going Chapter 11, they came in and bought it. And so most people don't know about the pre-Golan Globus years,
mhm.
but that's when I did.
I think it's hard for a lot of people in the internet age who do all their connections through social media to realize the importance of all the face to face contact you had, that you were just showing up and meeting people. And even if it was, the guy in the editing bay, next to yours at Canon, you were just out there pounding the pavement.
Yeah. Yeah, this whole thing uh, baffles me that people, it's like, yeah, I always say to people, why don't you just pick up the phone and call me? They have to write, you write these emails and it's so labored, and then you can make them, they could take something the wrong way or whatever. And the technology is so, it's there just for the sake of technology. If you went to an island somewhere where they haven't seen any modern man, say, and you go to the chief and you show the chief um, uh, a computer and you say, here, you can type to your friend in the next tribe on the top of the mountain. And he types out something and then he hits enter and it goes there. And then the other guy doesn't understand what he's saying. And you say, okay, now, and that's texting, say, or even on a phone. You say, okay, now check this out, chief. And you dial the other guy on the mountain, his number, he would flip out. That would be so far advanced to be able to talk to the guy on the phone than just typing out little messages. And yet, cell phones came in with talking on the phone, and then it's evolved to texting, which makes no sense to me. But
Are you
that's what,
pretty accessible to people? Could someone pick up the phone and call Jeff Lieberman?
uh, they could, if they want to send me money to PayPal, I take PayPal and all major credit cards.
Oh
No, they
my.
can't. I mean, yeah, I'm more accessible. Like on the internet, people can't believe it. It's really your email and all, because there's filters. Like I don't have to respond to things, but I certainly don't have to. You know, I'm not being stalked. I don't think so. In that regard, I'm accessible. And my phone number, you have that. If I don't recognize somebody, I don't pick it up. It's pretty simple.
We have a great anecdote in your book where you had been working for a company that made TV commercials, and you formed your own company because you were making kind of your own freelance commercial. And then I guess you didn't have a phone number, so you had a very clever way to create a company phone.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it clever. It's another example of the balls that I had at that age. I figured it has to be a New York City number, and I was living with my parents on Long Island, so the 516, picking up the phone in my parents' bedroom would not cut it. and I called it Jeff Lieberman and Associates. There were no associates, but it sounded really official. And so what I did was I found a phone booth in Central Park, which I wrote down the number of the phone booth. And then when I tell people to call, I'd be at that phone booth at a certain time to take the call and say, Jeff Lieberman Associates. And because you couldn't hook it to an answering machine. There's no such thing.
That's great, because I think a lot of young filmmakers reading that part don't know what a phone booth is.
Especially a phone booth when I describe in the book, when I got an important call and there was this wino laying and the door was wedged open and he was out cold and I had to step over to like straddle him to take the call.
I mean, that sounds like a scene that would be in one of your movies.
Maybe he was one of the associates of Jeff Lieberman Associates.
Exactly. Poor guy. Well, I know that people always ask you about Squirm, and you've talked it over and over. So instead of going, into the specifics, which, it's a drive-in movie classic. And again, I'm so glad it came out during the era of the drive-in movies, because to see that on the big screen outside at the drive-ins would probably be the ultimate way to have seen that.
It's funny that it never occurred to me to see the movie in a drive-in, because the drive-ins were very commonplace. In fact, I recently Googled the drive-ins, what percentage is like 25% of all theaters in the United States were drive-in theaters in the 70s, around the time I did Squirm. I had no idea, but certainly they were all over the place. And it just never occurred to me, like, why would I want to see it in a drive-in when I saw it on a gigantic screen in Times Square, And it was only 2 years ago that a fellow named Harry Guerrero, who does these screenings at the Mohan Drive-In in Pennsylvania, he had Squirm, and I came out there and in 35 millimeter, and I saw it for the first time 2 years ago at a drive-in. Better late than never.
So did the drive-in enhance the effect of all those outdoor scenes?
Enhance? No, it just was the closest thing for me to get a sense of what it was like back then to see the movie in a drive-in. But the big difference is the sound, because today, I don't know if you've been to the modern drive-ins that are left, but they don't have those little tinny speakers that hang on your window.
I remember those, yeah.
Yeah, and that sounds like, I mean, come on. You go through mixing a big movie and then you have it coming out of this tiny little tinny thing. Yeah. But now they have it hooked into an FM radio station. So as good as your system in your car, and that's everybody's car has stereo, it's digital, and even the cheapest car is going to have something that's way better than any drive-ins back then, and probably way better than the movie theaters had back then. And so it was summertime and the windows were open to all the cars. So it was hearing, the movie, the sound was incredible. There was, about 300 cars there. And they let me get on the PA system it wasn't a PA system. They wanted me to introduce the film. And I said, how can I introduce the film? Like, you're going to stand in front of the screen and all these people are in their cars? They said, no, you go in the microphone here, it'll come out their radios. And I went, yes, that is so cool to get on the radio and to drive in the cars. And, but I didn't have anything prepared, which I never do, like this interview. And so I said, I closed it out by saying, so everybody, since we're out of drive-in, get out your condoms and enjoy the show. And
well, you hit the nail on the head there, because obviously people like to make out at the drive-in. They kind of had that reputation. So I'm wondering, like, has anyone ever come up to you and said, Hey, my parents conceived me while they were watching Squirm at the drive-in.
I would not. They didn't come up to me and say that, but I would be shocked if that didn't happen. Well,
Well,
Squirm is so much more popular with people than I ever. It kind of crept up over the years when I got the feedback. It's because like people like Guillermo del Toro and Eli Roth and all that told me, "Oh, Squirm and this got me interested. This is why I do this." And a lot of people have said that, and I then I realized I said, Guillermo, how old were you when you saw it? Because I know they're all kind of the same age, like not half my age, but close to it. And I said, well, when you were 11, you saw it, right? So sure, it's going to make a great impression on you. And that's what you're talking about. And to me, and I have this in the book, it was The Incredible Shrinking Man, but I was 10 years old, right? So when I saw it then, it's a, I would love to meet Jack Arnold, the director, because he scared the crap out of me when I was 10. Well, it's the same thing with Squirm. It's a generational thing. I've had
absolutely.
I've had at a convention, this couple came up and they didn't look insane at all. And they came up and they said, you know, Mr. Lieberman, Squirm is we met, our first date was Squirm. I said, oh, okay. You know,
That's
it's like,
romantic. I like
it
that.
wasn't a drive-in. That was the movie they saw. So, and she said, and we memorized every line from the movie over the years. And I just laughed and I just was writing down the autographs. And then I realized they're not kidding. And I
Hmm.
said, I wrote it and I couldn't tell you half the, I said, okay, I'm going to pick a scene and you tell me. Uh, and I stayed away from the iconic, you're going to be the worm face that everybody remembers. And I just came up with some arbitrary scene and they went back and forth every line of dialogue.
Wow.
So, I know people do that with The Godfather, but Squirm, it's amazing.
That's quite a compliment.
I guess so.
Well, I think one reason people like it and like the writing and all that is because you did develop the characters, and before the worms come out, there's a lot of drama and a lot of dynamics, and it's almost like would you call it like a Southern Gothic? It almost the beginning with the mother and the kitchen. It's almost like a Tennessee Williams
Yeah, a
play.
lot of critics said that, but I didn't know anything about Tennessee Williams or Gothic or I didn't know anything. Still don't. But it's
But you
just
had
in
good actors. I like the
I
acting in
do
it.
it. Yeah. Well, the thing is that I have I have good instincts, or I wouldn't be alive. And I do everything on instinct because the fact is the movie was written for New England. Um, I was into Lovecraft at that time, and I wanted to do it, that Lovecraftian weird fishing town where everybody stares at you, outsiders don't belong. And by the time the movie came together, it would be too cold. We were going to shoot in November. There's no way. I wanted leaves on the trees. I didn't want to, in New England, it would have been snowing and a different movie. And you can have worms would freeze. Don't worry about the worms. They're in the ice cube. So we moved down to Georgia a month before shooting. So I had to I couldn't change the dialogue, but when I cast a lot of locals, I said, now you say this the way you would say it. And that was the only way I could do it without, what am I going to get the dialect from the Andy Griffith show? And it turned out really good because they were able to do it. The trained actors, Pat Piercy, she was from Texas, and she was right with it. And Don Scardino is supposed to be from New York, so he didn't have to do that. And it really gelled. I let them, um, I gave them a lot of leeway. Like, I don't know if you remember in Squirm, the scene with the egg cream and the,
Oh yeah, and then the worms are on the bottom of it.
yeah. And those people that are in that luncheonette are all locals and not actors.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, there's no way that Jeff Lieberman is going to write a line. That was the worst storm since I was knee high to a duck. You know, but I get writing credit. They go, gee, you really captured the local. Well, my instincts are enough to know I should get credit because I know enough to do that, rather than me telling them what to say, knowing they're not actors. And the same was Willie Grimes, the father, Roger's father, the Worm Farm. When he says, you're going to dig deep, sonny boy, right down to your toenails. Now, you know exactly what he means, but if you take that literally, you're not digging at all because your toenails are on the ground. So how do you dig down to your toenail? You know, but it just works. I could never have written something like that. And he just said it.
Well,
So,
you were this New Yorker, college educated, going down south to, rural town to film. The main character in the movie is this big city college guy going to this small town. I mean, was this main character a stand-in for you? Did you
yeah,
see the parallels at the
yeah.
time?
Don Scardino, everybody said to Don, you're Jeff's alter ego. And Don, started to, we did shtick on the on the set all the time, doing jokes, and he would do a great George Burns imitation. And that's why it was so easy to do, because he was so plugged into what I wanted. And we're still friends. And he became a very big TV director. And one time in an interview, he said that he was watching Jeff Lieberman directing, as Squirm, he's watching me direct. And he didn't mean it this way, but it came out like, well, if he could do it, anybody could. But he was, because I always call him on that. I said, that's what you meant, Don. Come on. No. I mean, I just thought I could do what you were doing.
Well, to tackle something like that, especially something with so many special effects and shooting on location in all kinds of weather, I mean, what were the biggest challenges you had in making that?
The biggest challenge is what they call today practical effects. Back then, we didn't call it that because it was because all effects were practical. There was no CGI. So whatever you're going to put on the screen, you have to see in person. And the challenge to me was, I said, I don't believe that you're going to, through cutting, you're going to make something work. People say, well, you're going to fix it in the editing room. You have to be there with the practical effects and believe what you're seeing the way the other actors are seeing that same thing. If you don't believe it, if I don't believe it, the audience is never going to believe it, no matter how much I edit. Now, you can edit and make it better, but the scene, I'll give you the best example, is when the worms go up Roger's face. That's kind of like the image of the movie and the big scene that everybody, and it crawls up the Rick Baker's special effect. You had a crew of 30 people standing around in a swamp. You had Roger there sitting on an apple box, and you had two people on either side of him with monofilament fishing lines pulling the artificial worms up through the mask on his face, the prosthetics, right? So you see exactly how it's being done, right? And yet we rolled the cameras. We had two cameras. I was on one of them, and shot it. And there was a guy named Mongo on the crew. He was like 300 pounds. And he was a gaffer. And somebody says, "Where's Mongo?" And they said, "Mongo's throwing up. He's by the pond throwing up from what he saw." I went, I think I have a hit, because here he's seen exactly how it's done, and it still grossed him out. So when you don't see those people around them, and it's in the context of the movie, it has to work, and it did.
Isn't it just fun to do a gross out scene?
Yeah, the funny thing is that through Squirm, there was so many times where I screwed up my own takes because I was laughing. I couldn't, so many times Pat Pierce, he said, Jeffrey, if you're going to laugh while I'm doing this, I can't work. And she was right. I'm just cracking up. But it was a lot of fun. If I didn't have the pressure of, the whole thing done in 5 weeks, that's a lot to do.
5 weeks. Wow, that's a tight schedule. Well, it was released in 76. Did you shoot it in 75?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, did you start shooting that after Jaws came out?
Uh, no, there's no way I saw Jaws when the movie came out.
Okay, because Jaws wasn't that
No,
summer of 75?
Jaws. No, wait, you're right, because Jaws must have been out because she has a logo of Jaws on her pants. In the movie, the girl climbs through the dentist's office.
Because it seems like at that time, yours was probably the first of, Jaws catapulted this wave of, animals gone wild, horror
Yeah, I
disaster
wasn't thinking of
films.
Jaws at all when I made it, but you're right. The Jaws came, and I certainly saw Jaws, but I wasn't thinking of Jaws because I was thinking about the birds and why it worked.
You think
And
you capitalized, at least the distributor said, wow, right place, right time for, an animal-oriented horror disaster film.
yeah, I maybe. I think it was more the fact that that you were able to. What really got Squirm made was the same reason that Friday the 13th, Sean Cunningham, and a whole bunch of other movies, The Hills Have Eyes. It was that you could make a movie at that point in time and go to there was not a lot of, all these film festivals didn't exist, but Cannes certainly did. And you could go to Cannes, and in the film market, not in the competition, but in the market, American movies that were genre movies, because you didn't have to really understand the language, just like action pictures. So it would appeal to Europeans and uh, Asia, and you could get all your money back there. And then you have the whole United States for profits, or sell it to a studio and they would distribute it in the States. And then on top of that, you could play television. You could be the movie of the week, and which is, they pay more money than you spent on making the movie just for that one sale. So that attracted a lot of genre movies to be made at that time. We didn't consciously do that, but that's what opened the doors to getting financing more than anything else.
Well, another irony in the book, you talk about uh, Just Before Dawn, that it's kind of grouped with the whole slasher genre, but when you were making it, you weren't inspired by that. That kind of whole genre was just starting to brew. And I'm just wondering, how do you like that movie to be perceived? Because it sounds like you weren't using a slasher formula for that.
Well, first of all, that's another term like independent. The word slasher didn't exist.
Hmm.
How could you know you're making a slasher when there's no such thing?
Right.
And that came later on. And so basically, I didn't, when I was making Just Before Dawn, to me, it was all about the movie Deliverance, which had such an impact on me. I wasn't thinking I'm doing, like I was doing a low budget version of Deliverance without the big stars, but I wanted to do it as best craft wise that I could. And I certainly didn't think of the deaths being the drive, what they call now, they say, oh, it's got great kills, or it doesn't have enough kills. To me, that's not filmmaking. I hated Friday the 13th for that reason. Oh, here's a cool idea. Let's have a girl and get a hatchet in her forehead. Oh, cool. It's, what is that? You're just stringing together the special effects that you could think of killing people. To me, that's not movie making, writing. It's just, I don't know what it is, slasher movies.
Mhm.
But nevertheless, in retrospect, and they clump everything together like they do with music. So what is Just Before Dawn? Well, that's a slasher movie. Well, what is Deliverance? Is that a slasher movie? No, no. Why? Because it has Burt Reynolds and John Voight, you know?
Hmm.
So,
Well, you shot that in Oregon,
yeah.
and I think I read somewhere online you were saying that what set your movie apart, say from how, those slashers were filmed, you really tried to film the location and bring, a more cinematic feel to it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Joel King drove me crazy. He was used to working on, he was a camera operator for Mario Tozzi, who did like, I don't quote me on this, but like movies like Funny Girl, and big glossy Hollywood movies. And so he was used to this sexy lighting, and I know how to do it. I know I appreciate it, but you don't do it with that was a 6 week shooting schedule. You can't do that. And I would fight him all the time on, he wanted to get the most beautiful shot, and I knew how to do it myself. I knew he was right, but he didn't have to deal with the higher ups like I did. And he always thought, I connected with him a few years back, and he said, I always thought you hated me. I said, why? He says, well, I was giving you a hard time for the whole movie. I said, Joel, you're the reason the movie looks so great. It's like, so why would I hold that against you? But he did. He pushed it. He would lie to me about the sunlight and all the stuff that it was my first movie. I would have believed him. But he wanted things to be backlit. And the key, when you're shooting anything in woods and you want it to look like that, or anything in the wilderness, I see people shoot movies and it's like, well, why couldn't you do this in Central Park or somebody's backyard? They don't get back with the camera and have the environment in front of the camera and in front of the people that are involved in the movie. So you don't feel like you're there, right? But when you're in Oregon with waterfalls and cliffs, to get back you're going to risk your life. And we did.
Hmm.
We had to jump over these crevices and, the heights were incredible, but that's the reason it looks so good.
Well, there's sort of a rush of shooting on location, especially one that does have that risk factor to it.
Yeah.
Were
Yeah.
you were
Well,
you kind of adventurous back then? Did you enjoy that part of it?
no, I had, I'm blocking it. What is the height? You fear of height?
Oh yeah, fear of heights.
Yeah. Not to the point that I wouldn't fly, or not to the point that I wouldn't, but I had that phobia. I guess it's healthy to have it so you don't get killed. But
Well, wasn't there like a suspension bridge in the film?
yeah,
Like, did that make you a little queasy walking across that?
I didn't walk across it. And neither did the actors. That was a lot of trick angles on my part. I was able to, the people that did walk across were all stunt people, none of the principal actors. But I got back far enough that you think that's the whole idea of having stunt doubles. The
Mhm.
actual actors were walking over, I shot an angle over a rock, and it looked like they were coming, off the wide shot where they're all the way up over the waterfall. But the fact is that if they fell off that rope bridge, it was probably 2 feet into the sand.
Ah, okay.
So
Well, so for the people you worked with, both cast and crew, and talk about, these movies they were a part of, have you shared this book with them? And, what's been some of the reaction from those people, who
the
worked on
only,
these?
yeah, well, Richard Crystal loved it. He's it's early now, but the only people that responded professionally is John Landis. He wrote to me that he's going to buy the book. I put out an email to, um, they call it Mick Garris.
Oh, Mick Garris. Yeah, I've seen your interview with him online.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm friends with him and all the so-called masters of horror. But anyway, John wrote to me and he said, "I bought your book the first day that it came out, and through Amazon, and then I didn't hear from him. And then just yesterday, I got an email from him, and he flipped. He said his review was, the book is perfect, big capital letters.
Wow.
Can't beat that.
That's a rave review.
Yeah.
Well, the thing too is, that's from one of your peers, someone who's been through what you've been through during the era you worked in. That must mean a lot to get that from him.
It does. It really, it blew my mind, because I think he's, he's very successful in all the movies. The movies that he's done are way more successful, way more famous than he is. Who directed Animal House? I don't know. Who directed Blues Brothers?
Mm-hmm.
Who directed American Werewolf? I mean, the guy. But I happen to know, because I know him personally, he is so funny. He's one of the funniest guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to capture. I just wrote back to him. I said, thanks, and you should write a book, because you're one of the funniest guys. If he wrote a book, I'll pre-order it, I told him.
It's funny, another filmmaker you mentioned, and I think you still stay in touch with him. And we were talking about drive-ins. I think the first, as a teenager, the first drive-in movie I saw was The Incredible Melting Man. And you were friends with the director of that.
Bill Sachs. Well, when you mentioned Joe and you saw in the book, that was Bill Sachs.
Oh, okay.
In the beginning of the book. Is that not clear in the book?
Oh, okay, so he did that re-edit of Joe?
Yeah, he was a film fixer first.
He salvaged that. That was almost like going to be
Absolutely.
trashed, and he made it a hit.
Absolutely. That's how I know him. I don't know him from making movies, because he hadn't directed anything, and neither did I. I met him. He's old. He's pretty much 5 years older than me, maybe. And he was an established editor that would go around and fix salvage movies, and that's what he did with Joe. It was called The Generation Gap, and he rebuilt the movie around
Peter Boyle?
Peter Boyle's character, yeah, and then changed the name of the movie.
Well, one thing that you do on your website, and you talk about in your book, is this 80s time capsule called Remote Control.
Right.
And you've got a really great tagline for the movie: what you view can kill you.
Is that? I didn't like that.
Well, I read that somewhere, and
Yeah.
which was great because, the 80s, especially the mid to late 80s when home video was taking off,
Sure.
you did a movie that both existed in that environment, but also commented on that whole craze of home video.
Yeah, well, that's what I tend to do. And for those of you at home, don't try this at home. That if you're ahead of your time on something, somehow our society says, well, he was ahead of his time, but you never hear somebody was ahead of his time and therefore he became a zillionaire. It's always in the sense of, well, too bad, he was ahead of his time. And that's me. Like I'll do something that in the case of Blues Remote Control is the best example. Here I was making a whole movie that was commentary on the time I'm living in, as if you're looking back at it in retrospect. That's sort of like schizophrenia. So at the time when I made the movie, people went, everything's so exaggerated, and I was doing that consciously because it was satire on everything. So it took 20 years before, now everybody loves that movie. I've seen it in the New Beverly, Tarantino's theater.
Mm-hmm.
They said, oh, you're in LA. Could we show, I have a 35 print of it. I said, can we show that? And I said, when? Next week? I mean, I'm here. I can have somebody ship it. Oh, we'll pay for the shipping. And the Lakers were in a final game to win the championship or something. And I said to this guy, Brian Quinn, I think, it's like, nobody's going to come. Like, the basketball is a big thing, and it's just sold out, packed.
Wow.
And they loved it. I mean, they really, and then most of them never saw it. So it's really something that at the time of today, don't forget that the audience, they grew up. I don't know how old you are, but like people like Eli Roth and Guillermo,
Mhm.
they grew up in video stores, so they really relate. I've had people say, because I did a scan off the negative, and it's really high quality, and they stop it to read the titles of the VHSs in the racks, as Jane Fonda's workout and stuff like that. So it's real nostalgia for the 30 somethings.
Oh, exactly. And that was also kind of one of your lost movies for a while because it really didn't have a good transfer to video, ironically. And you, it sounds like at your own expense,
Yeah,
restored that and did a really good release of it.
that's right. I because somebody in France had a not a negative, an internegative. It was I mean interpositive, but it was never. It was flawless. It was beautiful. I did some color correction. I spent a good amount of money doing it, but it was well worth it. And so now people are are exposed to it. Not only exposed to it in a high quality, and it's had a real resurgence. Still is.
Mhm. Well, so many people like your golden age movies, especially, The Squirm, Blue Sunshine, Just Before Dawn, but you still make movies and, more recently Satan's Little Helper, awesome title, awesome movie, but I'm especially curious of how you came to do a TV project with John Waters.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That was at the Tribeca Film Festival. They they wanted Satan's Little Helper, and showed it there. And I was in the VIP. They have these tents, for people in the business. And I saw somebody from Court TV, and this woman, she said that they are looking for scripted shows. And I had this idea, uh, I don't know, forever, like 20 years, just a notion of a television show called Till Death Do Us Part, where, because every time I go to a wedding, I'd look at the two people and say, well, sure, you got the bridesmaids, you'll love each other. How come so many spouses wind up killing each other, killing one another?
Hmm.
The bride killing. And so they all started out lovey dovey like that, white wedding. And wouldn't it be weird if you could have somebody who knows what's going to happen with the couple that winds up one killing the other? And then there's a perfect, it kind of writes itself if they're true stories. So when I told that to her, she says, this sounds exactly like what we'd be looking for to get into scripted. And I wrote a couple of episodes, and the guy who's the uninvited guest at the weddings, I called the Groom Reaper. And to me, once I formulated the character, I started hearing John Waters' voice in my head and writing. And I said, he's the only one that play this. And I called him, and he said, let me read it. And he read it, and it was like, boom, he's the Groom Reaper.
Well, he's always been a big fan of true crime.
Yeah,
So did
yeah.
you guys talk about that, your common love for that?
No, we don't talk about that. What do we talk about? Well, he's very big. He does a one man show that's hysterical. But I don't. I went one time, and I'm thinking, even though I don't have to pay, why do I want to see his one man show when it's the same as me going to a restaurant with him? You know, I know,
Exactly.
I know this. As a matter of fact, he sends out the funniest Christmas cards every year. And since I'm not into the holidays or any of that stuff, The only thing I look forward to is his card, and I just got it like a few days ago. It's
Oh, you're
hysterical.
still on the list.
Oh, I'm totally on the list. And I sent. Oh, by the way, you talk about celebrities. John is waiting for the book. I sent it to Waters, and he said I didn't get it yet because the post office is it's crazy now. I mean, you send a 3-day delivery, and it's been 2 weeks already, and he
Oh
didn't get
dear.
it. Some other people. So the timing of all of this, with the normally I would be doing podcasts like this on the book, but I would already have been at a few bookstores and maybe a convention or a film festival with the book and sign it for people, and everything is just stopped. So
With
basically,
COVID and the holiday season,
yeah.
all bets are off for those shipments.
So I have to just it's just terrible time, and I have to just push everything kind of forward where it's going to be a new release 6 months from now.
Right. Well, you'll definitely have to do like a bookstore thing, like an official bookstore release.
Oh yeah, in LA, there's a place called uh, Dark Delicacies.
Oh my God, I was there on my last trip. I love that place.
Yeah, and I forgot the guy's name, but I did when Remote Control came out and when I released it in Blu-ray, I did a signing there, and it was great.
Yeah,
So I
great
would,
store.
I would absolutely do a book thing there. And there's one in New York City, a huge place called Forbidden Planet downtown,
Hmm.
and I would do it. You just can't do that now. So that's
Right.
the best I
Well,
can.
I'm curious if you've talked with John Waters about this. Which is his favorite of your movies?
I never asked him. Um, I know he loves Squirm. I gave on his 60th birthday. I gave him the paperback.
Oh, that's right. There was like a movie tie-in paperback.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh,
And
that
Blue.
sounds like eBay gold.
Yeah. They that was not uncommon. Any movie that was widely released in the States during that time had a quote novelization. I didn't.
I know another thing. You wrote somewhere or said that the VH version of Just Before Dawn is quite a collector's item.
The VHS, yeah. And people are getting, I mean, you go on eBay and you see the numbers that people ask for things. I just saw somebody asking $590 to the screenplay of Remote Control. And it's real.
Wow.
I don't know where they got it. And it's a long time ago. And it has all the updated pages, the color pages for, actual shooting script.
Do you
But
still have copies of all your scripts?
yeah, I actually sold somebody was such a fanatic for Blue Sunshine, and I sold him um, the screenplay because I had two of them, and the reason it was really unique because that movie was set in New York City when I wrote the original script, and it wound up being in Los Angeles. So the scenes on the subway. It's basically the same movie, but uh, that makes it more collectible, I guess.
Do you
Just
ever get
collectible.
approached by people who want to remake your early films?
Yeah, Blue Sunshine is the one that so many people have shown interest in. As a matter of fact, somewhere along the line, MGM optioned it for a remake. Trying to think of the director's name. He did Girl with the Pearl Earring,
Hmm.
whoever that director is. And
I remember the film, but yeah.
I thought, whoa, what? That's a weird combination that guy would, just didn't kind of add up that he would want to do Blue Sunshine, and then he wound up doing Young Hannibal, uh,
Okay.
and the option expired. But so many people have done different things and optioned it or whatever, but never.
Are you kind of glad that it wasn't remade?
No, I think that you can't remake it. You have to really update it because it's of a time, LSD and all of that. It just the hippies becoming, straight. You can't if you wanted to literally remake it and have it take place in the 70s, I don't know what the point. They do that, and but now we're going to get some young hot star to play, just literally remake the movie, but it wouldn't resonate for today's audience. It's like, wait a second.
But you know what's tough with remakes like that? Like, how could they duplicate Zalman King? Because the chemistry with him, you wouldn't have, and that was such a big part of the movie.
Well, yeah, you wouldn't have, assuming you'd have some kind of chemistry with somebody else, but um, it's just the idea of the movie is made, or my movie's made of a time, and
Hmm.
that has all to do with the experience of watching a movie where and if you watch it today, it's still, well, I'm watching a movie of the 70s, and this really nails the 70s when the hippies became straight, and went into the straight world, and the past came back to haunt them, and that's what it has to be. So if you contemporize it, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can make sense out of a drug that went around that people took, but it's not going to resonate. It's not going to have that element that was so important to it, that it was the past coming back to haunt them, that you can't just walk away from all of this unscathed.
Or now with everyone, anticipating the COVID, um, getting inoculated. The whole fear of now another kind of drug going into their system. It seems like someone updating that would now use that as the drug, and then 10 years later, what it affects people.
Yeah, but it's really funny that I don't understand any of that stuff. Everybody that's saying those kind of things don't realize how many things they were already inoculated, and that's why they don't have smallpox, chickenpox, measles, diphtheria,
Hmm.
polio. So they walk around not having those diseases, and they don't. I mean, didn't they read a book or talk to their parents? Like, that's the reason why you don't have those diseases. That's the reason you're not dead. So,
Right. Well, what's the drug they give for ADHD?
oh, I don't know.
Is that
Maybe.
Adderall?
Yeah, Adderall. All the kids took it to get
Yeah.
better grades,
Because
right?
maybe for an updated version, the more common drugs are Xanax or, but I think what makes Blue Sunshine, that whole plot thing is, 10 years after the fact, when you think, oh, I'm okay, it's that fear that something can affect you that far down the line.
Well, yeah, because when you took acid back then, the big fear that hippies would say it, but the government would push it, that the after effects, the flashbacks.
The
And it
flashback,
was
yeah.
true when I took LSD for the first time, and I was on the train going to the School of Visual Arts coming home, and it hit me almost. It's like an aftershock from an earthquake. All of a sudden, you're tripping, and it was a good couple of months later. So there is some truth to that. I just exaggerated it big time.
I read somewhere there was a proposed project. I don't know if it's like 10 years back or whatever. Do you remember something called Cine Muerte?
Do I remember it?
Yeah, did that ever come to fruition?
If it did, it must have been the biggest bomb in the world because you would ask that question. No. How did you know? You know it from the book, right?
I can't remember if it was a book or something I read online of you, because I read a lot of interviews online too, so they're kind of meshing together. But I was just taken, what a clever title, Cine Muerte, like, I don't know, death cinema.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
that going to be like a horror project? It sounded like almost like a follow up to Blue Sunshine.
No, it was nothing like that. It was, in the, um, well, if you read the book, I get into where that, the fans, and when I was in Spain, that was a true story about how I thought about all these fans and inviting them to come back to, visit us in New York. And I didn't have any idea who they really were. And they were all horror fans, and just put two and two together. And what if now they have a name for that called home invasion.
Home invasion.
Yeah, but that's what the idea was.
Well, it sounds like you always have movie ideas swirling in your head, but you're not going to like act upon each idea. Like, what does it take for an idea to really take hold and say, okay, now I'm going to devote the time to actually write a screenplay?
It takes a lot. I can't plan it. Um, I I don't know. The stars have to line up. there's no there's no logical reason for it. I just say, "Woo, there's a movie there." And also, my criteria, it can't be anything like, in my mind, anything like something else. You know, where so many people say, "Oh, snakes on a plane. Let's do snakes in a submarine." I don't think that way. So Satan's Little Helper was a perfect example of that. And I wanted to make sure, since I've been out of the loop for so long on horror movies, that I wasn't sure that this concept of having somebody who you think is somebody harmless and you know them and they're totally a different person and they're actually a serial killer, I wasn't sure that that hadn't been done already. And I actually bounced it off so many horror people to make sure that it was original.
Right. And it wasn't a horror movie. Do you remember that movie Apt Pupil, where
No.
the young guy meets that modern day or that Nazi and kind of gets lured into taking on the ways? Different movie, but it's just the whole idea of sort of an apprentice to someone evil, or being kind of seduced into that. I think it's something that resonates with that.
um, yeah, I don't remember it, but I know that there's been derivative things since Satan's Little Helper that have used that idea.
Oh yeah. Well, I
And
think and I mean this in the best way possible. There's just something very vicious and mean-spirited about Satan's Little Helper, and that's why I love it.
yeah, a lot of people.
Because one thing is, it's like people are making horror, but they act like, oh, but we can't cross this line. And it seems like you said, well, why can't we cross this line?
No, I didn't even say that. I say what line?
Well,
There's
that
not a
well
line.
the shopping cart scene in the grocery store parking lot. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but you can say that, and everybody would probably agree with you. When I saw it, the first time I saw it with an audience was at Tribeca Film Festival. Believe it or not, I didn't see it with an audience before that, and it was just the film was just completed, and they wanted it, and there's 240 people, whatever, packed house, and I didn't know how people would respond to a lot of the stuff. So when the thing with the cat, where he takes the cat and slams it against the wall and writes "boo" with the cat's blood,
Hmm.
um, and everybody was kind of like, gasping. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. And then as soon as it cut to the the house where Catherine Winnick, you hear ding dong. So I'm setting the audience up like, now that guy who just did that with a cat is coming and she thinks it's somebody else. And the audience laughed
Hmm.
when I said, I got him.
Yeah.
They didn't walk out, they all laughed. So in other words, they got on board with what I was doing.
Well,
And
that's the whole thing is horror automatically has just this whole sense of being such a heightened reality, and people who can't just get into that reality and take everything so literally. I'm always suspicious when people can't laugh at a movie or even at themselves, realizing, yes, this is so absurd. At times, what can you do but laugh at something?
yeah, but I think they're laughing at the satire.
Yeah.
Um, if you
Right.
don't know what I'm doing, then tough shit. I'm not gonna do it differently, so I'm gonna placate an audience. And as a matter of fact, we were actually told that because of the title, and the fact that it's a little boy and a serial killer, and the little boy is embracing, the devil, um, Satan, that we're going to have a hard time selling the movie in Latin America, all of South America, Spain, and it was true. Couldn't make a sale, and also Walmart, and Walmart is big money, and Walmart said change the title of the movie. And Walmart will have movies that people are getting skinned alive or whatever, but it's called, a deer in the park. They couldn't have that title and that cover in their store.
Wow.
So, but I'm not going to feed into that shit.
Well, it's a
So,
clever play on Santa's Little Helper.
of course, that was the idea. My original idea that I sketched down like on a napkin, only it was a napkin, was that if a kid writes to Santa, they write to the North Pole, and actually, probably to this day, the U.S. Post Office gets thousands of letters to Santa from little kids, and they post it, in the North Pole, and they put a stamp on it, and the parents put it in the mailbox, and all of that shit. So I thought, what would happen if it was Satan's little helper, and a little kid wanted Satan to do something for him, and he writes to Satan, and he flushes it down the toilet, his letter,
Oh,
because that's going
funny.
to go down to hell. And that was my original notion. That was the spark that made me think of the whole movie.
So, what
But
did that do for you as a filmmaker? Since you took your time before making it, was it just this joyful experience just to jump back in such a bold way?
uh, yes and no, because I made a huge mistake. I knew what I was doing, but I didn't research enough. It was the early transition from film to digital. If I had it to do over again, I would have shot in 35 millimeter, which I know inside out, because the other form features and other stuff is all film. But going over, there was not the way they do it today. Everything you see is, quote, digital, but it's on a drive. That was that Betacam. So it was
Hmm.
like 1080i, it's high def. They call it high def, but it's on tape. So it was
Hmm.
like a bastardized. It was so clumsy, so slow. It just, I hated it. But
Was editing tough with that?
yeah, everything was a waste of time, waste of money. You had to down convert all the footage so you could put it in the editing. If I would have known all that,
Mm.
if somebody spelled it out, I'd say forget it. I
Was
was so
that
eager.
something that people were urging you to do sequels to?
No, people asked me, you know, about a sequel because I just at some film festival, I made a remark saying, "Yeah, the next time he shows up at an all-girls Catholic school," and the audience, immediately erupted, and then they said, "Well, when are you making the movie that?" I said, "I was just throwing that out there."
Well, another thing that's happened since you made it, this whole subgenre of Christmas horror films.
Yeah,
Who knew? I mean, in the 80s, we had like Silent Night, Deadly Night, but that was more, those were isolated. But ever since Krampus and all that, there's just been churning out the holiday horror.
yeah. Well, there's a reason. There's a really good reason. It was more true uh, 20, 30 years ago. It's called Evergreen. There's always going to be like make a Thanksgiving movie, the Christmas movies, It's a Wonderful Life and the Christmas Story every year, it's timely. So the reason studios would always make those movies was that it would every year they can get TV play, down the line. And then the horror people picked up on it and took every April Fool's Day Friday the 13th. It's always going to be a Friday the 13th. You just put the movie out or show it on TV on Friday the 13th. So that's where that all came from. And it's, you know, it's a little marketing edge to do a holiday movie. And now I see on the internet, everybody's saying Die Hard was a Christmas movie, you know. And
Right,
I'm
just
waiting
because
for them
it took
to,
place.
yeah. So I didn't even realize when I was doing it, but you watch Blue Sunshine. Well, that's a Christmas movie. You know why? Because when they go in the department store, the whole place is decorated for Christmas.
Well, especially with Satan's Little Helper, do you think it's also because Christmas and holiday time is happy on the surface, but deep down, it's such an anxiety ridden time for people that they just want that release of a horror film?
Well, Satan's Little Helper is Halloween time,
Or I'm
so
sorry, yeah, but I'm saying it like the holiday stuff in general, like to Christmas. Yeah, now I'm blurring my holidays. Uh-oh. But I think especially like with the current Christmas ones that there's just, times that are supposed to be happy for people, for a lot of people, they aren't happy. And it's just fun to see a horror movie just rip that sentimentality to shreds.
that could be. But also, I think when you say what people are supposed to be, they're being marketed to. You can't market people's emotions and what they actually feel. The Macy's, oh, we got to watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. When I was a kid, blah, blah, blah. There's only one reason that parade exists, and that's because Macy's wanted to sell shit, right? They
Hmm.
sponsored it, they came up with it, and they're the biggest, they were the biggest retailer. Just imagine if there was no such thing as that parade or anything, and then Amazon introduced this giant parade and buy all the shit, buy, and guess where you're going to buy it? On Amazon. That's so it's
Yeah.
all these things. Hallmark invented Mother's Day, the
Hmm.
cards.
Yeah.
So, but you can't make people feel. Then it evolves to the point where you're saying, "Oh, you're supposed to feel a certain way." Who says? You know?
Well, another thing I read about Satan's Little Helper, someone said that they thought it was just a really good representation of Halloween in a horror movie. Like a lot of horror movies are set in Halloween, but they don't always take advantage of all they can with that, like trick or treaters and how things are decorated. But they thought that you captured just the holiday of Halloween really well in it.
Well, I loved it. I loved Halloween. That um, my feeling was always that Halloween was the only time where where not all people, but people that really get into Halloween, they show who they really are, and not by putting on their costume. They're showing once a year. They're showing what they really are inside through that costume. If they're really serious about it, and all the other days of the year, they're faking it. They're really in costume, playing a guy with a tie and a suit, going on the train. But on Halloween, he's a gorilla.
So, what
I
else have you been doing in the past 10 years? Is it all been documentary work?
uh, I
Are you retired?
retired. I don't play golf. That's my. I always think of that. It's like, what do you do? Oh, let's play some golf. Well, what if you don't play golf? I guess you fish. No, I never thought the concept of retiring. I don't understand it because retiring, you got to retire from something, and you got to retire to something, don't you?
Well,
Is
I think with the book, maybe this could be a new chapter of maybe doing more writing for you.
Oh, one of the things that came out of the book, because so many people have said it's so well written. I mean, I've been doing the write. I haven't never wrote a book, but I've been writing for 50 years. So if I can't write now, but
No, I agree. And again, I think I said this earlier, but even the parts that aren't directly about your filmmaking, just what was going on in your life at the time, those were really engaging stories.
well, here's the thing that I tried not to make it an autobiography, I want to do a career memoir and stick to the career. But I can tell you that I have easily this much material that has nothing to do with my film career. And since I have the chops to write it that way, in fact, a lot of times I resisted. The closest story in that book to something that's uh, not a movie making story is the Woodstock story. But the reason I left it in there, because I was going to take the whole thing out for that reason when I got down the stretch, was because it was my art director telling me he had the food concession at Woodstock. And it was I never would have gone to Woodstock if, or known about it if my art director, when I was doing commercials, didn't tell me he had the entire food concession. So it was a film related.
Right, because you worked with him where you made TV commercials.
Yeah, yeah. And he wound up, it was Food for Love. And like I said in the book, we didn't bring any food because we figured we're going to be covered if we, Charlie Baxter. And it turned out to be one of the most famous disasters in history because, as Charlie said, he knew absolutely nothing about catering to 500,000 people, let alone 50 people.
And then luckily you had brought a package of Oreo cookies that you traded for sandwiches and joints.
Right. Yeah. When you're in among 400,000 or 500,000 stoned hippies that all have the munchies, an Oreo cookie is like having, a gold nugget. It was like one of those old westerns where you had the gold. And so it was great to barter. Taught me a lesson.
Very good. Probably good filmmaking knowledge because it sounds like, on the set or in Little Italy, you kind of have to barter too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You always have to be. If you have street smarts, which, if nothing else, I have, and I've been told that by pretty big producers out in LA. And funny enough that the ones that told me that, like Jennings Lang or Bob Chardoff, they were street smart kids from Brooklyn starting out. They didn't have any money. They were very poor. And they became, I don't know if you know Bob Chardoff, who produced all the Rocky movies, got very, very successful, very wealthy, Raging Bull. And they had very similar sensibility to me. So they called it, they want to see that sense in a younger person. And I didn't do it intentionally. That's who I am. So
Would you call that chutzpah?
Yeah, balls, chutzpah. But there's more. It's street smart is also the smart part. You can have all the chutzpah you want, but if you don't, you gotta have that other ingredient, which I can't even explain what it is. But it's very hard to put into words. But I know when I see somebody that has street smarts, I know it, and they know with me. It's like don't try to con me because you can't. I'm unconnable. Is that a word?
Unconnable. I like that.
Unconnable. You cannot con me. And the reason, for all you listeners out there, assume everybody is full of shit. Just the opposite of what you're taught. You're taught to give people,
The benefit of the
benefit
doubt.
of the doubt. That's bullshit. Assume everybody's lying, conniving, wants something from you and all that. So that's the most cynical thing, right? You'll be right about 98% of the time. That's pretty damn good. Where if you go the other route, you're going to be wrong 98% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So when and this has been my experience, when you're wrong, in other words, it's the onus is on the other person to prove they're not a liar, to demonstrate, not with their words, but their deeds, that they're the real thing. And then you really got something. You know, it's
Do you
like a
think that's
test.
especially true in the film industry where people are
Oh
trying
yeah.
to bolster themselves up?
Anybody in the film industry, I went out there, I knew everybody was full of shit until proven otherwise. And then I saw guys like Jennings Lang, who's at the top, big studio mogul, and said, he's a real guy.
Mhm.
Edgar Lansbury and Joe Baru were like, I got to a point, they produced Squirm and Blue Sunshine, big Broadway producers. I didn't even need a contract from them because if I had their word on something, it's done.
Another
And
thing you learned in Little Italy, the handshake deal.
yeah, yeah, those guys, you see, that's the funny thing. They're not full of shit either, the mob guys.
Hmm.
They're not kidding. When they say something, they're not kidding. But to a fault, it's so literal, very simple. And they know, and believe me, they know when they're all street smart. They wouldn't be alive. So they certainly know when you're bullshitting.
Well, at
Listening.
this point in your life, have you ever thought of teaching filmmaking?
I actually had a bad experience. I taught one semester at SUNY Purchase, and it was my fault for taking the position. It wasn't a film class. It was like one of these, it was a course on the history of horror film, but I would love to teach that to a class of film students. It
Like a
wasn't,
hands-on class with
no,
actually.
not even hands-on, but people that are majoring in film,
Hmm.
right? So, and interested in film. No, it wound up being just one of these easy, they thought easy course to get 4 credits to talk about movies, and they knew nothing about, they were just there. It was very, it became, I couldn't wait for it to get it to be over with. And plus, um, uh, let me put this delicately, but you got 35 people that are seniors and going to graduate and go out into the world. And most of them didn't know shit from Shinola, not about film, about anything. Because I said that every horror movie, more or less, is of the time, like I was saying before, of the time that you make it. So what Hollywood learned early on is when there's a fear that's being instilled in the audience in everyday life, you capitalize on that fear. They've already done the work for you. When you write a script, and the biggest example was the radiation movies of the 50s, which I lived through. And that's what got me hooked on
Hmm.
these films. And I say, I described the Cold War um, uh, and the bomb shelters and Incredible Shrinking Man and all that stuff. And the radiation movies were spawned from, like I say in the book, the documentaries that the government was putting out, that radiation can cause rabbits to have 2 heads and all this crazy stuff. And that's where the Blob and all those movies came from that. Well, they start writing papers, and I'm not kidding you. One of the women in the class wrote, during the Cold War, it was very cold, so people went into the movie theaters to keep warm.
Oh my goodness.
And so I'm saying, I went to the person who runs the program, and I said, when I took this class, I'm basing everything, my angle on this. You could teach it a lot of ways, but I was basing it on how the times are reflected in the horror movies and using those fears to channel into the movies and scare people. I said, I assume that college students know history. They know I don't have to tell them what the times were and what was going on. I just wanted to demonstrate how it was transformed into movies. These kids don't know anything about history, about, just basic stuff. And I got the worst response that I could have gotten.
Wow.
She nodded her head in agreement.
Oh dear.
I mean, she should have said, "Who the hell are you to come in here? These kids, this school." No, she agreed with me. Basically, I said, "So what? The high school system, they kick the can forward. They shouldn't graduate high school with this kind of education, and they're ready to graduate college." And
Wow.
it was such a bad. If I would have had a film class, serious, that's a good school for film, and I shouldn't have done that. General education, liberal arts students
Mhm.
that don't, and they're going to go out in the world, and then you always read a headline: "The economy is so bad because college graduates are flipping hamburgers." You ever read that? You go,
Mhm.
no, the economy is doing great, but that's all they're qualified to do. Just because they have a college education, it's not like what what that used to mean, I guess.
Sounds like you would need a class that's handpicked that has to really show they want to be there and jump through a few hoops first.
Yeah, yeah. I would think that, if I taught at NYU, I wouldn't be having this conversation. If it was NYU Film School, they're dead serious, and this is what they want to do. So I wouldn't have to do that. But it was just I picked the wrong. It was my fault because I just sort of said,
Mhm.
no, no, I want to film, because the people that do, I found out the people that do get those positions in the film schools, they never leave.
Yeah.
So there's never any openings because it's a cushy situation for them.
Well, like you said earlier, when you went to film school, you wanted to have teachers who had practical
Yeah.
experience, who were
Oh
working
yeah.
in the field. Do you think you could provide that someday, the experience of you as a working director?
I could. I probably won't, but I could.
You know what you could do? What's that thing that Martin Scorsese does? Those online classes. They always advertise them on
Oh,
YouTube. I
you
think
mean the not master class?
yes, that's it, masterclass, where
Yeah,
I think it's more of lecturing in a cushy,
yeah,
set where he's like in an easy chair talking to the camera.
yeah. A lot of people they make. I know somebody who told me all about how that works. They get paid based on how many people subscribe to their class. Like Dustin Hoffman does one on acting,
Mm-hmm.
But nah, I don't do that.
Well, and especially too with your writing now, do you think you might ever just write a filmmaking guide, put down into a book what you've learned, not just the anecdotes like this book, but a more nuts and bolts how-to filmmaking book?
No, there's people that have done that so many times and they're better at it than me. I'm more interested, like I was saying before, if I did a follow up to this book, it would be called like what is this? Day of the Living Me. Maybe I would do Night of the Living Me. And just make it the personal because there's so many things because of my age, not my age numerically now, but when I was born, um, and coming into the baby boomer story and being at the right place at the right time with the right curiosity, I guess, to experience so many. I was there for the first Earth Day. People think, oh, it's Earth Day. Well, I was at the first one. I marched in the first women's lib march down Fifth Avenue in 1970. Um, I was at the Kennedy Airport when the Beatles came in. I was at the Stones came in for the first time to the United States, and I was at the New York Academy of Music, and it was half empty because they were not very popular. Um, and it just goes on and on. The things that I've done um, would, people could relate to. Certainly, baby boomers could relate to. And it's just a question. I was at the School of Visual Arts, and Andy Warhol's factory was like 2 blocks away. All this
Really?
was going on. Yeah, all this stuff was going
Wow.
on. We didn't, everybody looks back on it, but when you're living it, you don't think, wow, this is you know, I'm living
That's
in
what's
the
cool
60s.
about though your New York experience. See an LA filmmaker who would just be driving everywhere. They wouldn't, be down the block from anything. That's what's unique about the New York artistic experience. All this is going on blocks away from you. You're
Yeah.
bumping into these people, seeing them at the coffee shops. I mean, did you feel like every day you could just bump into some new Andy Warhol kind of person?
Well, the funny thing is that Andy Warhol himself was not Andy Warhol that he was a pop artist. He was getting publicity, but he was and he was a real party. He was very social. Every time I go to any kind of organized party or event, you'd see him. It was not a big deal.
Hmm.
Um, but getting back to, Studio 54,
Did you go?
when the movie Grease came out,
Yeah.
John Travolta, um,
The big party? Like, were you
we
at
were
the
invited
premiere?
to the Ziegfeld premiere because I knew the choreographer.
Oh my
Very
God.
well, and Pat Birch, and then the after party was at Studio 54, and
Wow.
and so we didn't have cell phones taking pictures because most of the things that I did, it would be incredible to get pictures of it, but I was my wife went to the ladies' room, and I'm there in the middle of the dance floor, and this guy starts dancing with me, and it was Elton John.
Elton John. Oh my
And
God.
so we're dancing away, I was stoned, and he was really fucked up, and and then and it's like upbeat music, and we're carrying on, and then uh, um, then there was like the music slowed down, and you want to do like guy to guy dancing. I didn't know he's gay, and I didn't give a shit, but it's like I'm not doing that. And then Joanne came out, and she spilled a drink. She says we both cracked up laughing because she fell. But and then Ed Kooky Burns came over.
Right, because he was in Greece, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was at the party, and what a douchebag.
Oh no.
Ed, if you're listening, I mean, at least I don't know him personally, but at that moment, because Joanne said, "Oh, uh, when I was a young girl, what is it, 77 Sunset Strip, and you were such an idol. He was in all the teen magazines and all." He says, "Yeah, well, I hear that all the time."
Oh my. So you got to see the jaded Hollywood, the
Yeah, but I mean,
stoned
guys like that hear that
Hollywood.
all the time. Yeah, there's a nursing home around the block. You can hear that all day.
How many times total do you think you went to Studio 54?
Oh, I think I was only there one other time, but there was other clubs that were, Electric Circus. That was way more insane than the Studio 54. Electric Circus was the place down in the Village, and I was there a lot. Um,
Hmm.
and then there was the Cheetah. Uh, I forget. There was so many of those
Hmm.
clubs,
Did
all
you
at the,
ever go to a Mud Club?
of course. The
Hmm.
Mud Club and CBGB's were nearby, and
Hmm.
I went to. I think when I did Blue Sunshine after maybe it was um, sorry, it came out in 77, maybe 79. Somebody told me they're playing your movie either at the Mud Club or CB's. I don't remember what it was, but I said, why are they Blue Sunshine? Yeah. And I said, how could they be playing the movies? These are clubs, noisy clubs. No, they put them on the TV sets, they're all the big televisions. They're not screens, they're television sets, like with a tube.
Wow.
And they're all around. And so they put in different psychedelic stuff. They'd always do that in the 60s. And so I went down there to check it out. And there was a group, the Ramones were playing. I didn't know who the hell they were, but they were loud. And
How
I
did they get a copy? This was before it was released on home
I,
video.
I it was on. I don't know. All I can tell you, no, it was already released, so
Okay.
they could have gotten it off television because that thing went on television pretty soon. Within a short period of time, CBS ran the CBS
Was
movie.
that just a trip to see it on the TVs in the club?
Didn't show the whole movie. This is what happened. They showed the disco scene where the
Oh,
guy's
okay.
freaking out in the disco. So I'm thinking, and they're showing that over and over and over, and you can't hear it because they're blasting while they're playing. So I asked somebody at the bar, like, "What's up with that? That movie?" I didn't say I made a movie, and he said, "Oh, that's a movie. A guy named Jeff Lieberman. He was making a movie about how disco sucks." And so, because this was the beginning of the punk thing, and that's the first time I heard disco sucks. And I'm thinking, so they think that I was making a statement that, and it's exactly what they thought, that I was making a statement that disco sucks because this guy's got his hands over his ears and the music, the disco music, is making him crazy.
Oh, wow. So they kind of gave that a new meaning.
Yeah, yeah. And then people asked me in interviews after that, and I went, yeah, that's the ticket. That's what I was thinking.
Oh my God. Well, now that we're back on Blue Sunshine, I need a good Zalman King story.
Um, a good Salmon King story. Gee, I don't,
One that you've never told before.
I, I don't really. I'm trying to think of me. I even have a good Salmon King
Did
story.
you really relate to him much outside the movie? Did you become friends?
We did become friends, but he was a very intense guy and very, he
Does he
was.
credit you for inspiring him to become a director?
Yeah, he did, but it's kind of the opposite. He didn't. He saw the movie and he said, when he saw the movie, his relaying to me, he says, "You're a great director. Sorry for ruining your movie." That was his
Oh,
words.
wow.
He said, "You did a tremendous job, and sorry for ruining the movie." And what he was saying was, um, half half his performance, what's bad about it, was totally my fault. And the reason is because I said the character. I want the audience to not to think maybe he did the Blue Sunshine. See what I mean? And so he was playing that. Like you
Okay.
wonder, did the doctor, did he take Blue Sunshine? Listen, but in that case, to give a guy direction that, so he's going to skewer his whole performance based on that, and it didn't work at all.
Well, at the
Um,
time, I'm assuming you had already seen Zalman in Trip with the Teacher.
I didn't see that. I saw he was in a TV series called The Lawyers, The Young Lawyers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I
Have you
didn't.
seen Trip with the Teacher yet?
No, I never saw it.
Well, put that on your queue because that's that's one that has a cult following. I think you'd enjoy the kind of weirdness of it.
He also was in the Passover plot where he played Jesus.
My word.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
you got
Well,
to
the
see
thing
that one.
about Zalman, he went on, of course, to do, Red Shoe Diaries and all those kind of erotic thrillers. What did you think when that became his genre?
I went down to the set. He had a factory. He was making a fortune off Showtime, and he had a factory with all these sets, and he was talking to me about directing one of them. And I don't know, he was telling me the story of one that I would direct. And I told him, yeah. And I said something that was typical me. I don't know what it was, but it was like to make it funny, like I can't do that stuff straight. Are you kidding
Mhm.
me? The romantic crap. And he said, I don't think you're right for this. I said, no shit, Salman. I mean, come on. Like, I can't even watch. it's so obligatory where you see them, the woman, how many times they do this in every other TV series now, that the women can't, they undo the guy's tie. They can't get their clothes off fast enough, which never happened in real life ever, going back to the caveman. Like, is there, somebody says, oh, an atomic bomb is going to go off in about 30 seconds. You better get your clothes off and fuck. You know, but they do it. And like, and what are you watching? I'm always thinking like, what? Okay, they're going to fuck. So you want to watch every step, or you want to stick to the narrative? So to me, the only way that any love scene, kissy kissy love scene, fucking whatever you want to call it, is if you pull back and you're watching the same thing through the scope of a rifle. Then it comes alive, where you have the guy's head and then he turns over just when the guy's going to pull the trigger. So you're watching the same action, but you're watching it with a narrative reason to be watching it. So,
what's that thing you're saying with Mick Garrison? He's got his group. Do you like have your East Coast equivalent with people like Zalman King and?
Well, Zalman's dead.
That's right. When did he die?
He died a good, I don't know, 6-7 years
6, 7.
ago.
Well,
Yeah.
up until then, I mean, did you have a recurring group of people you'd go out and meet for coffee and just talk shop?
No, not at all. And as a matter of fact, the Masters of Horror that you're talking about, those guys, I lived in LA, I lived in Beverly Hills, and I moved back to New York, and Nick formed that thing and kept inviting me, and they had all these dinners. And I never met Tarantino. He's the only one I really wanted to meet, because I knew Guillermo and I knew Eli Roth, and I didn't really care about like Wes Craven. George Romero was there. Toby I knew. I didn't have to go to a dinner. But I would never, I got to a point where I said, Mick, you're making these dinners knowing that I'm not going to be in LA. No, I'm not. Yeah, you're scheduling, you're finding out where I am. But I never went to one of them. I don't even know if he still does it, but they had this thing, Masters of Horror. We all got together at restaurants. I was always invited, but I never went.
Were you ever invited to film a segment for the Masters of Horror TV series?
No. And it's too complicated a reason. There was a reason for it. It's not anything. It's me telling Nick that the people that put up the money for it, they just had screwed me on something big time. Had nothing to do with that. So I said, don't even bring up my name. And they wanted to bankroll a movie that I wrote and for me to direct. So it wasn't about my talent.
What's your biggest near miss where you were aligned with a movie and you had maybe a big star, a big studio? Did you have like one big miss where it came close?
Yeah, that was Cinemuerte. I had John Turturro and I had Gael Garcia Bernal, and that was Cinemuerte that you brought up.
So that was the biggest near miss.
Yeah.
And what did that feel like?
Well, if it was my first go around, I probably would have been discouraged to the point of doing something else, going to advertising. But since I've been around the block, that's the nature of the business,
So you started pretty tough. I think people perceive you as a pretty tough New Yorker. But have you had, a tender moment where, especially on a particular film, you wanted it to be received in a certain way and it wasn't? I mean, what's been your just most vulnerable moment as a filmmaker?
Well, it's funny that the perception of me, when I wrote a script for Dustin Hoffman, it didn't get made, but it certainly really established me in the screenwriting in LA. And when they hired me to write The Neverending Story 3, it's a family movie. And I said to them, of all the people, this is a big budget movie. Why me? And they said that they read the script that I wrote for Dustin Hoffman, and we got to see your mushy side, your sentimental mushy side. I said, really? They said, yeah, so you would be well suited to do a family, you know. And I didn't say I couldn't do it, but I never thought about doing it.
That is
So
like the most unexpected credit on your resume.
yeah, yeah, and it was weird. They bring me in to take a thing that's an established German the first one, huge hit that kids grew up and tell their kids about this movie, and they're going to do a third sequel where they want to Americanize it and make it like Home Alone. And they're bringing me in because I'm American and I
Uh,
have a mushy side.
so when you were hired to do this, had you seen the first
No,
two?
no, no. I had to watch
Incredible.
first. My kids knew about it. I had to watch the videotapes. They gave me the videotapes, and I hated them. And you say about that. Tell me that was purely a paycheck and a big one. Anybody that works in the business, if they're lying. I mean, they don't even have to lie. Everybody does that at some point. Somebody waves that kind of money in front of you, and you know,
Well, the
and
first movie had a really good theme song.
yeah, I didn't even like that. I hated everything about it.
Oh,
The only
no.
experience I got, I mean, I got sold credit. It was big budget. I got a big pay, and I got Jack Black. They cast Jack Black before he was Jack Black, and he's the villain. And I wrote all his stuff, and I was up there in Vancouver, and I kind of bonded with him, and he's a great guy. And I got to see the Henson creature
Hmm.
puppets.
What other
So,
people did you work with or interact with early on before they made it big?
um, well, I worked with. It's funny that all the people that I didn't work with, throughout the book, I tell you all the casting people like Johnny Depp or Stallone or all, that Martin Sheen that I could have had for nothing. All I had to do is say yes and cast them. And then they went on to be famous, but you don't know that that's
You
going to
don't
happen.
know.
So
No.
as a matter of fact, when I did Satan's Little Helper, and I was down to a couple of women to play the lead, the sister,
Hmm.
Jenna, and Catherine Winnick. She, I guess she was. I don't even know what she was in. I don't remember, but she was. I said to her, um, I'll tell you right now that you'll be much better off not getting this part. And she said, why? I said, well, here's the history of, like, I turned down Kim Basinger, boom, 9.5 weeks, big star. I turned down Johnny Depp, 21 Jump Street, then he becomes the biggest star in the world. Stallone. So why? So aren't you better off? Like, nobody that I actually cast became giant hits,
What
right?
movie were you considering Stallone for?
That was Squirm,
What was he going to play?
Roger.
I was going to say that's probably the one he was
Yeah, but that
most
wasn't, he
suited.
wasn't, I didn't even, he probably doesn't even know about it because I didn't even want to see him. Uh, I,
Hmm.
I knew, I loved the guy. I saw him in Lords of Flatbush. I just said, he's so wrong for this
Yeah.
because he's going to work in a worm farm down south. I mean, forget it. He'd agree.
Because isn't that the thing? A lot of times the agents don't even tell their clients they're up for these things or being considered.
Yeah, well, in that case, it was a friend of mine who worked out at the gym with him, and I happened to know who he was. If I didn't know who he was and hadn't seen the Lords of Flatbush, I would have had him come up,
Hmm.
and then seen that he wouldn't be right. But yeah, I don't do that, And but I loved him in Lords of Flatbush. I said, this guy, and then I read Rocky before they made it. He's a great screenwriter too. But
And you mentioned that in your book. The guy that wrote Joe before it got re-edited went on to direct
directed,
Rocky.
no, directed John Avildsen.
Yeah,
Yeah, he
or,
directed
or
Rocky.
directed, yeah, and kind of salvaged that. And
Yeah,
it's kind of that small world, you don't know, today's person, that you meet there, in 5 years can be a Hollywood A-lister.
Yeah. And so I said to Catherine Winnick, I said, so it's like the kiss of death. If I cast you, you're not going to make it big. And she laughed. I said, I just have a terrible track record. I'm not a star maker. And so then when I saw this, the Vikings, and I saw her on Sunset Boulevard, giant billboard, and there's Catherine Winnick in an outfit from the Vikings. I went, holy shit, I fucked up. Little helper, and there she is on the billboard. So maybe the
Wow.
hex is. If I make another movie, maybe the hex is broken.
So I just want to make sure people know where to find your book. I know it's on Amazon, but where to find you. So where's the best place online to learn about you and your work?
Well, the book you can learn about a lot by. The book is Day of the Living Me: Adventures of a Cult Filmmaker from the Golden Age, and it's Amazon. And if you do read it, please leave. For some reason, there's only 3 reviews on there. I don't know how this works, but people are telling me they're leaving reviews and I don't see them, but take a crack at it. And you can also, if you want interested in purchasing remote control in high def, all that on Blu-ray, it's JeffLiebermanDirector.com is the website. I repeat, in New Jersey, it's JeffLiebermanDirector.com. Sound like Larry King.
Like Larry, you do. You should have your own radio show.
Come in, Vermont. Yeah, so you can get it off my website.
Excellent. Well, to wrap up, to come back to that book is, which like I said, I really enjoyed and got so much more insight into the making of your movies and just what was going on in your life at the time. I'm just wondering, what do you want people to get out of this when they read it?
I don't know. I don't know what I want them to get out of it, except, well, the one thing that people are saying, it's almost like a character. They get to know me. I didn't do that on purpose, but that's the takeaway. And also that if they're interested in films and interested not just in the genre, but to see how things, I think it's almost more interesting when things don't come to fruition than when they do, But to see that aspect, because how would you know about movies that didn't get made, or projects that didn't come to fruition, but all the great, like me being with Robert De Niro. Did you like that part where we went to the Club 82?
Well, anything with De Niro's gold. Yeah. I mean, I think your strength is even people who we know, you humanize and you give a personal touch to.
Yeah, I guess so.
So I'm thinking, talking to you about Zalman King, or just any of these people, you have a way to humanize them. And that's what I like. And I don't know, I keep going back to the New York thing. For someone who's grown up on the West Coast, there's an exoticness about New York, especially during the 70s and that whole time period. And I think you do such a good job of capturing that place and time.
Yeah, well, did you see The Deuce?
Not yet, but that's on my queue.
Yeah, that would be right up your alley. Literally up the alley.
Up the alley.
Yeah.
Well, knowing what you know now, decades in the biz, what would you do differently with your career?
Nothing.
Nothing?
No, because that anytime anybody says that, it's like, oh, so I go back in time and I'm at that place, but I happen to know what the older guy knows.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I went back in time to that place and time and didn't know what I know, I would do exactly the same thing. Right? So if I went back in time and did know what I know now, I'd be somebody else.
Well, if you go back in time, And talk to your younger self and give him one piece of advice fresh out of film school, what would it be?
Become a lawyer.
Oh, I love that. All right, and last question. Are you really shrinking?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what my doctor told me. I was a 1 inch. I was 5'11", and I became 5'10". Yeah.
So when you're a kid, watched The Incredible Shrinking Man and kind of terrified you, and then it all came full circle. And then as an adult, after all those fears were gone, and suddenly, oh my God, I'm finally shrinking.
Yeah. And this time it's real.